Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm going to get us started. Please join me for a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hiaki ana te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihei, mauri ora. Just to note that we will have a short workshop after this in the same meeting room. Apologies, we have Kura Moehu away, and we have Mayor Barry, Mayor Caffel, and Mayor Baker online. But I will move the apologies. Who will second? Jenna will second. Everyone say aye. Fabulous. We do not have any public participation, so I will move on to the agenda. Do we have any conflict of interest declarations? Excellent. I would like to confirm the public minutes of the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group on the 18th of March. I wasn't here, so yes, Wayne will move. Who can second? Ron, thank you. Everyone say aye. Aye. Fabulous. I now bring us to probably one of a very key decision on our agenda today. So that's passing the Wellington CDEM Group strategy. This is very exciting. If you've managed to read it, it's quite it's an excellent document, and it's great to see that some of the focuses here. This is a massive step forward, and I think for the work that Dan has been leading and his team and this group in general. But it's very community led, very community focused, which is, I know, a key piece of feedback from all of us. And under the key objectives and focuses, having a real focus on te ao Māori is also a huge highlight, and just some clarity around governance. So a really fabulous piece of work, but I'm going to hand over to Dan and Jessica, who's going to spend the next about 30 minutes or so taking us through this. Thank you.
Kia ora, Mayor Whanau, thank you very much. And nice to see everybody here today. This has been a journey, a pretty intense, fast journey that has involved a whole bunch of people to get to this stage. So what I'm going to do is walk you through the how we got here, talk a little bit about the what, pause along the way for any questions. And I'll start off with, when I stepped into this role, the very first thing I did was do a bit of a listening tour with all of our council CEs in particular. And there were three themes, there were lots of ideas, but three themes that I summed up, which I've been using a bit of as a compass over this journey to guide where we've gotten to today. And the first one of that is really people wanted to better understand their risks and how well positioned our local and regional emergency management system is prepared to manage those risks. There was a strong desire to have a more strategic approach to get a better return on investment from the emergency management system with clearly defined priorities and a long-term work program. And finally, there was a real desire to see our collective efforts aligned so that our EM work meets not just our local needs, but our regional needs as well. So I've been using that as a bit of a compass over the last 8 months to get to where we are today. And so at the November session, we kind of raised the topic of having a longer term strategic approach, and there was agreement to pursue a 10-year strategy for the group on the 26th June meeting. And when we put that forward, we highlighted the importance of aligning to the National Disaster Resilience Strategy. It's a really excellent document. It puts us in sync with what's happening in central government. And we took that from the point of view of using that as the scaffolding to really frame what we do and contextualize that for our CDEM group's requirements. So once we kind of embarked on that process, we started you guys might remember we floated this idea of having 3 different levels of events, right? Most likely plus, a catastrophic, most dangerous series. We've done some initial exercises to kind of warm up to this framework, and that was kind of the scene setter for this strategy. We did an environmental scan, thanks to Mark and Charlie for helping pull that together, and to a surprise to no one, there are lots of hazards in the Wellington region that we need to be considering in our plannings, from a red weather wind event on the far left to a catastrophic Ikarangi event. That environmental scan also generated a range of identified emergency management system challenges. In that environmental scan, we identified 8 of those, and I won't go through those in detail, but it really highlights kind of where the shortfalls in the system are, and that kind of is really backed up by the minister's approach of quoting that the emergency management system is not fit for purpose. So that all kind of synced with what we were seeing out there, which then set the scene for us to have our first ever strategic workshop where we brought the mayors and the CEs together for a 3-hour workshop. And that was the first time we'd ever come together to look at strategy. And in that session, we looked at a vision, and we took the lens of those 3 different goals: managing risk, response recovery, community resilience. And we really got that feedback from everybody in the room of what really mattered to them, and that's captured in that word cloud there. Some good, some other fun conversations. Somehow I seem to recall Ron being put forward for Pope in that. Can't quite remember the details there. And we landed in that very first exercise. We talked about the vision. What kind of vision do we want as a region? And there was overwhelming support for our original vision, the one that we were already using, of resilient community, ready, capable, and connected. And so we kind of used that as a framework. Darren sent out some different options, but that feedback came pretty clearly back that everybody liked that model, but they wanted a few changes. And one of them was moving it from community to communities. And then when Darren and I were playing around with it, we realized ready is almost your end state. To be ready, you have to be capable. And behind all of that is actually connectedness, right? The idea of social capital. So we turn the order of that around. So it's actually starting with, you've got to be connected to be ready. You got to be capable. To be capable, you got to be, you got to have all those pieces in place to be ready. So a slight change, but that is the vision where we landed. And then we ran 10 workshops that included 135 participants across 18 different agencies. Jess did an amazing job with that, leading those conversations. And out of that, we pulled all kinds of data. We were really deliberate about the data that we collected across each one of those goals. And that went into the thematic analysis machine, where we pulled all that content together. We were really deliberate about how we captured that content. And we overlaid that with all the different reviews that have been taking place over the years, as well as the National Disaster Resilience Strategy, the EM bill, and the direction central government is going, to really pull all of that together. And that's kind of the how of where we landed with the content. I'll just pause there. Does anybody have any questions so far? Just on the how? I think one of the things that we really want to emphasize is we were really deliberate in how we put this together at speed, but we made sure we took in, starting with that initial workshop on the 18th of March, workshop feedback from a range of participants, and then made sure that we were capturing the national direction and all the reviews that had taken place over the last decade. So if there's no questions there, what you have before you is the Wellington Region CDEM Group Strategy that is going over a time period of 10 years. This is the first time, to my knowledge, and I've been in this game now for about 16 years, that I've ever seen any CDEM group take a long-term approach to this. So we are required by law to do what's called a CDEM group plan that lasts for 5 years. This has a longer arc because that was the feedback, is you guys wanted to see a longer-term, more strategic approach to emergency management. And so that is what we have here today. I'm going to walk you through some of the highlights of that. We opened at that workshop on the 18th of March, though, and Leanne Dalziel co-facilitated that workshop with me. And if you were lucky enough to see that presentation, it was really quite moving. The scope I gave Leanne on that day was, Leanne, what advice would you give to your 2009 self, right? The fact that she's led through a decade of disasters. If she'd go back in time and really emphasize one thing to everybody in the room and to her peers in that sense, what would she say? And the piece that she really leaned into is this idea of radical collaboration, right? The siloed approach won't cut it in the future. And that was really moving to hear, and really became central to the way that we've approached this strategy is yes, every council wants to make sure it's looking after itself, but as a region, we have to be working together. And of course, we are part of a wider national system. So we have to be leaning into collaboration. We've woven that right throughout the entire strategy. The other piece in there was, as a region, we need to be prepared to partner with central government. So it's really great to have Dave Gaughan here today from NEMA, and maybe he can touch on that later. I'd be interested in his thoughts. But we've woven that piece really right throughout the entire bit of the strategy. Another piece, when we were working toward the development of this, is we realized we don't want to just kind of create a qualitative strategies like, oh, get better get better at emergency management. We wanted to arc onto something, hang our efforts onto something that we could demonstrably move toward over a period of time that brings about change, right? So coming back to those most likely plus catastrophic type of scenarios, we agreed that we'd anchor onto this. And so Darren kind of challenged us throughout this whole process as the KEG chair of how do we kind of move this strategy forward in a really deliberate way. We put this idea forward, and I believe he tested it then with all of the CEs, and there was really strong feedback to, yes, let's anchor this strategy onto a measurable change that we can bring about. And so that's where this strategy, everything around it is kind of a most likely plus severe weather event that, obviously we have a 80% chance of another Cyclone Gabriel in the next 50 years, obviously odds you wouldn't want to take to Vegas. So we're banking on that framework, as well as some recent conversations out of Wellington City Council, looking at a most likely plus scenario, which would be like Kaikoura earthquake a little bit more for planning for the CBD. So we have that kind of framework that this strategy is going to guide us toward. Another really important piece out of this is the strategic role of governance. So most of the work that we've seen in the past has largely gone down at the operational level of how do we do better at operational thing X or widget X, Y, Z, right? So those things are all important when it comes out of the strategy and the type of work programs that we do, and we'll talk about that in a second. But a really important part of this is actually what is the role of governance, right? Because it's got to be the whole system. And so in 2015, there's the Sendai framework that came out for disaster management. Most of you are probably not going to be aware of that, but the very first thing out of the Sendai framework, UN worldwide emphasis, is the role of governance needs to be more invested in emergency management, right? So what we've done is we have taken all of that data and we've looked at it from a system point of view. So again, great work on Jess by pulling this together. And what I'm going to do is just run you through how we've kind of framed that so that we can come back to these points in the future. So as you as governments can basically come back to us and say, how are we measuring this change, right? Can we see this change? So we basically kind of have a qualitative descriptor of what it's like today, what is the change we want to bring about, and what does that good look like 10 years from now? So there's issues around clear roles and responsibilities, better decision-making processes, and increased innovation and flexibility under that managing risk goal. Under effective response and recovery, we have enhanced support and resources, increased efficiency and reduced bureaucracy, improved culture and morale, and a focus on professional growth and development. And finally, under community resilience, a stronger leadership accountability, better communication and collaboration, and greater stakeholder community impact. So there's an evidence base to support each one of these themes. Our intent for the future is actually to use these, working with the KEG chair and yourselves, to start framing these as conversation topics when we do work programs. So how you can basically have a bit of a framework to ask us the types of questions and ask yourselves, is the system evolving in a positive way? I'll pause there if there's any other questions. Yay. Okay, great. And finally, gets into the 3 strategic goals. So under goal 1, that idea of managing risk, we're aiming to consistently manage risk across the region. Number 2, effective and efficient end-to-end emergency management under response and recovery. And then finally, under empowered community resilience, we want to enable, empower, and support communities to be better prepared, right? So those are the broad 3 strategic goals. What I'll do is I'll walk you through the objectives under each one of those goals. First one, around managing risk, it's really around getting that kind of risk data into strategies to improve operational planning. We do some of this right now, but the goal is to be more deliberate about this going forward. Consistently and accessible risk communication across the region. We want to improve our risk information to guide future investments, particularly in the infrastructure space. Across each one of these objectives, each one of these goals, another real big step forward is there's a role for Māori under each one of these spaces. So we're really excited about this kind of shift because that has, again, not happened that we are aware of anywhere else in the country to this level of detail. But under managing risk, we want to make sure that we're embedding Te Ao Māori values and Matauranga Māori across a lot of our planning wherever we can. And last one is cross-boundary CDEM governance, right? So getting more alignment across the 9 councils of what we do and how we do it. Second goal around effective response and recovery is we really want to strengthen that community-led emergency response and recovery. So what's really interesting about this, and this is where all the data came out to support it, This is about the emergency management system changing to better enable and support that community response, right? So this is, you would think at first blush, this kind of sits in the community resilience space, but this is actually, how does the emergency management system evolve and change to be able to better strengthen that community-led response and recovery? It's also about building a regionally capable, interoperable, and scalable emergency management workforce, embedding Mana Whenua partnerships and Te Ao Māori principles into that response and recovery systems. Pre-disaster recovery planning came out really loudly. So in all of our plans historically, we've been really kind of response focused. Part of the shift is actually looking at it from a recovery lens and working backwards of what do we need to do. So response is part of that, but also lifting the game in recovery, which again is a really strong theme coming out of central government. And finally, out of this one, using any local evidence to drive after action process to learn and continuously improve. So you have elements of workforce and systems built in right throughout goal number 2. And finally, in goal number 3, we have empowered community resilience, right? So increasing social cohesion amongst people. We know all day long that it's not so much what is in your emergency kit, but who is in your emergency kit that matters the most, right? There's a real big evidence base to support that. So that's not just REMO or one emergency service doing that. Is all of us, our city council, community development teams, working hard to improve that social cohesion as well, and us working more closely with them. Iwi and Māori communities lead culturally grounded resilience initiatives, so that's a real shift as well, where how do we support and create an environment where Mana Whenua are leading in their planning. We want to facilitate more community capacity building initiatives, so it's a lot of the work that we already do, but how might we do that even to a greater degree in the future? How do we do more evidence-based public education? So I'm a big fan of whatever the evidence is, I will move toward that. And so there are certainly some areas that we know public education plays a critical role, and we want to use that evidence base to do that. And finally, number 5, improving the resilience of disproportionately affected communities. So again, that's a big, strong theme coming out of the national or central government direction, but it's also supported by international evidence around the world. People with disabilities, aged communities, time and again suffer greater consequences than other members of the population. So those are the 3 goals, 15 objectives. I'll pause there if anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, philosophical rebuttals.
No, this looks great. Just a question about perhaps it's number 3. I'm on a couple of trust funding groups, and they've started to set aside emergency planning funding for a future event, and that they don't quite know what the next step is. So would that be part of this process? That should this be approved, and then the group plan is started, these trusts could start to liaise directly with you to be part of this goal number 3.
Absolutely, right? So that is that linkage of greater cohesion and supporting community activities, right? So community capacity building can take shapes lots of different ways, and that could very much be one of them. That's the kind of work that when we get into the work program level, that'll come out of the group plan.
Great.
Any other thoughts or questions? Super. Janet.
Yeah, so how are we defining communities? Are they communities of interest, cultural communities, as well as geographical communities?
Yeah, communities of place and communities of interest are tied up into this, both defined, absolutely. And that's, I believe there's even a definition in the strategy for, under the vision section, we've defined each word in that vision statement specifically, and certainly communities of place and communities of interest. Good question. Any other points? Last couple slides. So where to from here, right? So that's what's in the document right now. I'm, like I said, it is from my knowledge, this is probably one of the most forward-focused approaches I've seen in the sector. As soon as I'm on holiday tomorrow, as soon as I get back, we'll be launching right into the group plan in a couple of weeks. That'll be an important piece of work where we then get into that kind of work program element. So what does that look like? This is the strategy, 10 years. The whole purpose of this is we're going to have this be a guiding 10-year document that will sit over the top of 2 CDEM group plans. And this next group plan will basically, out of each objective, there'll be a series of work programs that are meat and potatoes types of things that we can really dive into and start working more collaboratively right across the system where everybody contributes to Project X, where it's relevant, of course. And that is the quick overview of the whole kit and caboodle. Any final thoughts or questions?
Wonderful, thank you, Dan. So the decision today is to approve the strategy before going on to the working plan. So it gives Dan and his team the go-ahead. Does anyone have any, before we go to a vote, does anyone have any comments or questions that they want to raise now in advance of that? I can see Chair Ponta, did you want to? No? Sorry. Everyone's feeling good?
I just want to say it's good work. The whole process, I enjoyed it. In fact, we had a lot of fun. But underneath all that fun was a serious task and coming to terms with some of the deficiencies that we knew we had. So I compliment you. The process has been good. I like the document. There's some key stuff in there that should have been done years ago, but it's here now. It's great. So the whole engagement stuff, particularly with iwi, and I know how people were feeling after Gabrielle. And some of the incidents that happened. But we're in a good space with this document, so I'm really comfortable.
Yeah. Tautoko mea mā, you can never be too prepared. And this has probably been one of the clearest documents I've seen from this committee and work. I know council staff have spoken very favourably about this as well, so it's very good. In that case, if I'm not seeing any further comments or dissent, I will move it. And Mayor Mark, would you like to second as Deputy Chair? In that case, everyone say aye. Aye.
Aye.
I just want to give a big thanks to Darren for his leadership throughout this process. Jess, Mark, and Charlie, and our whole team that have worked really intensely to make this happen. Everybody's council teams that have contributed to this. Julie for her practical and emotional support as well on the sidelines. So thank you very much. This has been a big effort by everybody.
Well done, everyone. That's awesome. Great. Big tick. That takes us now to Dave, who'd like to give us an update on NEMA.
But I just want to expand on, thank you, on some of those issues. I'll just quieten my voice and expand on some of those issues. But firstly, again, I know, Dan, we had a session the other day, but congratulations on that plan. I agree with Mayor Ron's comments, a great piece of work, and really is a direction that will take Wellington region forward in terms of the emergency management. And great that you pinned it off the NDRS as well. So, Madam Chair, I've got just a few comments, but before I sort of jump into that, it's interesting just reflecting on some of Dan's comments and what he tied it back to, particularly in relation to the cost of emergencies more generally in terms of New Zealand. Revert back to a report that was put out by, I think it was NZI, as part of their briefing to incoming ministers at the start of the current government, which reflected and identified the annualised cost on New Zealand of response and recovery activities, and this is just in terms of insurance and opportunity costs, annualised since the Christchurch earthquakes is 4.3% of GDP. Now, as a previous defence minister, you would understand that's more than four times almost.
4 times well,
in terms of what we spend on it. So it really is something that we need to get to grips with. And again, as Dan reflected, that 13 to 14 to 15 million dollars of Gabrielle, that's just a mid-size event. And we're not even in a position at the moment nationally, I don't think, to manage something like that. We're not ready, and I'm often asked that question, and I'm sure I will be by the coroner again next week. Are we ready for the next event? No, we're not, but we are far better prepared than we were last time, in part based on our experience, in part in terms of the work that has been done, not just by Wellington, but all over the place, in reflection of and as part of the continuous improvement that we're getting from the North Island severe weather events. So congratulations on that. I think the other element, which is the essence of emergency management, which I don't think we've nailed yet, is this issue of community at the centre. And it comes up all the time in terms of the submissions from the for the emergency management bill, or when I go around the traps. They're great strap lines, but the ability to actually operationalise those into something that's meaningful and tangible, and something that is sustainable is really challenging. And again, I actually admire the work that Dan does. He's almost like an acolyte in terms of community hubs and that process and the stickiness that is getting around the country. So again, in terms of that space, I think the Wellington region really does lead. But it is going to be genuinely challenging, I think, to get something that is intergenerational, that allows us to recover more quickly. And if I look at the narrative and what we need to do in terms of changing that narrative, in terms of we'll fund response, we'll fund recovery, but in actual fact we need to move that to the top of the cliff and look at risk reduction and readiness, and look at emergency management as part of the national prosperity equation. Because if we can flatten those dips that we get, a $13-14 billion hit to the economy is huge. But if we can flatten that by putting a bit more emphasis on the front end, then that's something that we should all aspire to. And that is starting to change, and Treasury are starting to develop models to first of all actually acknowledge what it is we actually spend, and we never ever measure the human cost in terms of, we talk about lost productivity, but not the lost opportunity costs of humans, or for that matter, the psychosocial long-term effects that it has on our communities. So Dan and your team, and Wellington, well done on your strategy. In terms of NEMA more generally, we've mentioned a couple of things in the report, but it is exceptionally busy right now. Everybody's aware of the bill that is going through, has been out for consultation, and I'll give a quick brief download on that. But the other side of the coin to the legislative side is what we call the MSIP program, the Emergency Management System Improvement Program, which is the roadmap that has come out of the Jerry Mataparai report into NISWI. And we've just completed phase 2, which is actually developing and formulating a roadmap that is a genuine step change to where emergency management is right now. And at the heart of that, again, is community resilience and how to make communities more resilient than they currently are. That program, we anticipate the Minister will actually make an announcement this week in terms of the general direction of it. A lot of that is already known in terms of more generally, but it is a 5-year program that if you dig into it, I don't think we're going to be releasing figures or indicative costs, but if you dig into it, it is, as I say, significant investment is required to change where we are right now. And it includes things that have come out of the inquiry and that are identified in the bill, but in particular a common operating picture and an improvement in the antiquated technology, I think is the word that Jerry used, to manage emergency management more generally. The program is not about NEMA, it is a nationwide one, end to end. But of course, because of the economic environment we're in, we need to work out how we can actually afford it as we go through this next 5 years. So systems and procedures and processes, that's all a part of it. The communities, in terms of community resilience, our Community Resilience Fund is still $890,000. It was set up back in 1964, slightly different requirements back then, but back then it was $1 million. Now it's 890, so to work the figures out on that. I'm not sure how it does work out, but it reviews and looks at increasing that, looks at increasing the value and funding that we provide in public education from a national perspective. And then gets into, in particular, the professionalisation of emergency management. And if you look at every single report, one of the key themes, other than communities not being prepared for or understanding what their role was, is the lack of leadership at all levels in terms of qualification, experience, and currency came to the fore during that period. We've come a long way as a system since then, but we've still got a long way to go as we work through that professionalisation things. Perhaps if I just pause there and see if there's any questions around the MSIP program, and then I'll just highlight one or two of the big factors in the bill. If not, God, I love this place. I feel like it's a bit like being a chief of army when you have these open days and open sessions, and you go and out to the world, and then you ask if there's any comments, and it's just dead silence. I'm sure it's not quite like that. The bill, and I know that this is of interest to an awful lot of people. The public submissions, you may recall, and the feedback on the discussion document, and that's the key with that, is a lot of people have lost sight that that was just a discussion document with some of the options that were on the table. That closed on the 20th of May. And that sets up the options in terms of those submissions for what will be presented to the Minister before he takes that to Cabinet. There were 397, I think, in all submissions, and different from the last submissions, and we've used both lots, these 390 were substantive submissions. They weren't just a form. I think we've got 260 from the first lot, of which 124 were that's unfair, were a campaign that was put together by Animal Rights and SPCA. But this is 397 substantive submissions from a broad spectrum of society, from issue-motivated groups, through to councils, through to individuals, or for that matter, community groups and professional groups as well. That's being worked through at the moment to pull out the key themes, and I'll happy to go through three of those which are particularly related to local government. And those submissions, when they're pulled together and the Minister's happy with it, in fact we're required to have the paper to him at the end of this week. That paper will then go out for ministerial consultation for a period of 2 weeks before it is presented to Cabinet. It comes back for, I guess, rewriting, and then to Cabinet. I think it's the 23rd of July, but it's towards the end of this month. The key dates after that is a November 1st reading, then the Select Committee consultation period between November and May of next year, with the intent to have a final reading in June of 2026 and passage into law. So that's the general sort of approach to that. Just in terms of the key, if I can find my piece of paper, the key issues that were and are reflective of local government. Which obviously wasn't that important. Maybe I'll just have to go through it on my fingers. That was three key issues. 6.1, and you may remember this from, I'm sure, your intense study and reading of this, but 6.1, which was resolving, and again it reflects some of Dan's observations, resolving the overlapping CDEM group and local authority roles and responsibilities. This clarity of roles and responsibilities has certainly been highlighted and is under the magnifying glass from the Niswi and Cyclone Gabrielle period, and is a key focus of the coroner's court as well into those two tragedies. What we found from the feedback was that there was generally an agreement of the problem as it was described. Fairly mixed opinions about option 2, which was the generally preferred option, which basically said provide distinct responsibilities for CDEM groups and their local authority members. And some noted that it needs the flexibility to recognise the local authority, that some local authorities need more assistance than others. In general, submitters considered that the fundamental changes are needed, but there were a variety of reasons or views of what that might entail. We're going to land somewhere in terms of reflect what the main feel and thrust is from local government and the submitters. And as I said, there'll be another opportunity to review that during the select committee process once that becomes public. The second issue was providing clear and consistent organisation and accountability for emergency management. This is controversial, particularly with the CEs, and one of the options in there's obviously the status quo is always an option. I think there's a feel that that's where it should stay. The reality is that in some areas, the ability for controllers to get the ear of their KEG chair or their mayors as a tier 4, sometimes even lower level of official has been quite challenging. One of the options that was identified to try and resolve some of this is to make the chief executive of territorial authorities or regional authorities the controller by appointment. Now, being the controller, similar to what's happened in defence previously, being the controller with the requirement to delegate responsibility to somebody who is qualified and professional, qualified and suitable, whatever the words are, but is required to delegate. So an is to, unless they themselves are. And the reason for that is because they can delegate responsibility, but they can't delegate accountability. And as I say, the reality at the moment is that in some cases there have been instances of you're the controller, you're the one that's accountable, not my problem. And to my mind, chief executives can't say that. The challenge or the challenges I've had in the local government one was around the fact that chief executives don't have the time to be the controller. They've got their business as usual work to do. We're not asking them to be the controller. We're asking them to accept the accountability of controller and everything that means under legislation. But it also means that they can tell the controller what to do, which they can't at the moment, because all you have after you've made a declaration is the opportunity to sack them. Because the significant powers that you give to that controller are vested in the controller legislatively, not in the chief executive, not in the mayor at the moment. So we're trying to work through what that might look like, but as I think there's a conflation in terms of what it means to be responsible versus what it means to be accountable. And we have that actually, Ron, in terms of, the chief executive, chief of army is accountable, but he has to. It's not even a choice. He has to hand responsibility of all operational forces to the Joint Commander, but he retains that accountability. I'll just take any questions there if the other ones, because the last one is actually around mayors, which I'm sure must interest one or two here. The final one was issue 16 that I want to just cover off, and I'm happy to talk about any of it. The mayor's role in a local state of emergency declarations and transition period notices. I'll just read these points. Most consider that improved clarity and certainty is desirable or needed, a clear line of sight between the decision maker and for accountability. Many councils seem to assume that the mayor already has primary responsibility for declarations and notifications, which is actually option 2. But interestingly, not all councils support option 2. Some support option 1, which is the status quo. And again, the challenge is that clarity of responsibility and accountability. While others support option 3, to have a collective expertise of the group for declarations of national emergencies, of local emergencies. Some support for option 3. CDEM groups have primary responsibility for declaring a state of local emergency or giving notice of a local transition period for a single district or wards in that group area. However, it appears that some may have interpreted option 3 as empowering the controller to declare. Now, I don't buy into that at all. And see the value of the decision being apolitical and made by a professional CDEM personnel. I'm not saying that this is necessarily this council, but that is the case with a number of the returns that we've received. Mayors are considered the public face of local government, so many submitters see the value of option 2 for a democratic constitutional perspective. A state of emergency declaration is extraordinary in terms of the use of state power and should carry the visible mandate of a democratically elected leader. The public confidence perspective, media organisations have noted that the value of a known local leader is essential in terms of holding this particular role. So those are the sort of key themes that have come out in terms of the return, and there was a lot of submission, particularly in terms of the role of mayors. I'm not even much sure whether I should be giving my personal view. My personal view is that the mayor is the face. They are the ones who have been elected. They are the ones who should hold that that authority to do the declarations and things. Small things like, you know, do you have to have a written piece of paper versus a telephone call or something similar, or a text? Those will be worked through. Those are just you know, trying to get the system to catch up with technology, but it has been a bit of a bugbear in the past in terms of those smaller ones. So I'm happy to take any questions on anything to do with the bill, or to do with the MSIP program, or anything else if you wish to know about space weather or catastrophic planning or anything similar. Other things that worry us at the national level.
No, that's fascinating and a fantastic update. Thank you, Dave. You said it was just casual. That was like fully detailed and really, really wonderful. Thank you. I was seeing some nods around your discussion that the mayors, the role the mayors played in terms of the public face and the declaration and so forth. But were there any other comments or questions?
Yeah, so we just had two really amazing presentations, our local strategy for the region and the proposed bill. How do you see, is there good alignment between the work that we're doing here and the contents of the bill? And is this kind of work that we're doing in the region replicated across the country so that this stuff can flow down to a more local level?
I'll say yes and yes, but I think there are areas that Wellington are well ahead. And just mentioned to Dan and Amir Tori earlier, you know, Wellington was called out by the National Utilities Forum in Auckland as a how-to in terms of how they've developed their strategic plan, alignment with utilities and everything else, and is seen as best practice. What I don't think we do is we don't share well enough. Yeah. And we don't identify what is best practice and then copy it. You know, even in NEMA, I'm trying to get my team to just copy international best practice. You know, shamelessly plagiarise it. New Zealandified, absolutely. But until we do that, we end up with just disparate and fragmented systems, and we get the situation as we did with Gabrielle and the North Island group in Auckland, where we sent controllers from Canterbury up there to assist them, and it took them more than a week to learn their systems because they have a fundamentally different system to what is down south. That doesn't work in a country of only 5.5 million, where the only way that we can get ahead and support and create the depth and resilience that's actually required within the system, let alone the communities, is by having similar systems and talking the same language and having doctrine. That's why, you know, I like the fact that the community hub is becoming sticky. There's one or two areas that are still resisting, but it makes sense as the foundation, not the only way, but as a foundation to build on. So I don't know whether that answers your question. So yes, it does nest. Yes, this and what Wellington is doing, and the bill and the MSIP program, they're all going to be married. I'm sure there's going to be a couple of clunky bits once we find out what the select committee, because it's not ours once we pass it in. Once the select committee comes forward with whatever it is that's passed into practice. But it does address a number of things. And one of those is the fact that the current bill is silent on iwi Māori participation. Again, from my perspective, I'm not going to say where government will land. I don't know where they'll land, but that's just wrong in terms of what they bring to the party, or what some of the rural groups bring to the party. So being able to acknowledge that is equally important. Now, I know that the bill is not going to be everything to all people. That's just the reality of politics and everything else. But what I do know is it'll be fundamentally better than a 20-year-old act that we've got at the moment. And we've got to follow this up, with the national plan. So that's primary ledge, but pinning off that is the national plan, which is secondary ledge. And again, as we go through that, we're starting that this year, as we go through that, we'll be taking into account where all of the national strategies and plans are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I had the same question floating around my head, and it was born of some observations during Gabrielle. Carterton got off lightly. Marston got smashed. South Wai had its pockets, but we operated, and because we operate jointly as one entity on the Wairarapa, it worked. We'd had fish hooks, and we worked our way through that. But a couple of things came out of it, and one of these things has re-emerged again in the training exercise that we had recently. It was good to see that spoken of, but it was around recovery and forward-thinking recovery whilst you're in the hole, and making bouncing decisions past that group of people to say, well, what's the impact it's going to be on recovery if we do it that way? And that's good to see that thinking in there now. But the one thing that has led me to give me a degree of uncertainty when we go above Wellington to the national level is when you get an event like Gabrielle that smashed the whole of the East Coast, and I had people ringing me from other parts of the country saying, we want to go and help, we want to do this. One guy was a contractor who had diggers, flatbed trucks, trailer units, everything, happy to deploy his entire team and pay them to get up and do some work. Couldn't connect with anybody, and I was struggling to understand whether that was back in NEMA or whether that was up in the Hawke's Bay not picking people up. And then there was Task Force Kiwi landed on my doorstep, said, we want to go and help, but we can't get anyone to give us a direction or tell us where to go. So I just buttoned them into iwi. And iwi, Kahununu, said, send them to the Hawke's Bay, to the racecourse. We'll meet them there. We'll deploy them. And those two teams deployed for 2 weeks, just working with iwi and hitting Marai, which was great, which emphasises your point of concern that, the legislation, for whatever political reasons the government might want to not mention the word Māori in the legislation, that's a no-worker. That won't work. The networks, the infrastructure, the capability, it's like saying you won't use the Whānau Army or you won't use the Student Army, or these entities, these groups, these networks exist, and so we've got to be flexible enough to be able to bolt them on in a place that's effective, knowing that we also then have a responsibility to resource or at least coordinate them. So it's just about making sure that if we're doing good stuff here, that's cool, and I think we're pretty comfortable where we are now and confident going to the next one. Not 100% confident, but we're a lot more confident than we were because we've learned from some good lessons. But when we're bordering Hawke's Bay, or when we're bordering Tararua, or when we're bordering Hawke's Bay, and it's an event that takes the whole East Coast, you just want to know that everything we're doing here is being replicated further up and that it's all going to work. in a similar way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, it is wherever there's people, as you know,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah.
It becomes challenging. I don't think we're where we need to be with volunteers at all in any region. Just in terms of procedures, processes, how to manage. Student volunteer army, they've got a national body. Versus spontaneous volunteers versus task force Kiwi, which is still relatively new and working out how to do things. We've just brought on actually I don't think they've started yet, but a principal advisor to work through what a framework might look like nationally to enable the use of volunteers more effectively. Put aside spontaneous volunteers. When you get to organised groups that have a structure, particularly if part of that structure is paid, then you've got additional considerations that are still being worked through, even around health and safety, for example. So working through that and how to enable them effectively is absolutely critical, because they are a fundamental part of the community, but they are the front line in many ways, and they're a ready resource that I don't think we've used effectively during a crisis. Part of the challenge is that during a crisis you've got so many things coming down that the last thing you want to know is, task force who, and they want to do what. Why am I interested in those? And I think in some places the controller becomes the one point for everything, and that becomes a bottleneck in and of itself and slows everything down. So those procedures, processes, rules, tools, and technology and everything else, we've got to use that that far more effectively. And then in terms of enablement, how do you actually recompense some of this at the moment? And that needs to also be worked through, because whilst they'll do it out of their good graces, when you've got a really long event that may be weeks, months, years, if it's a major space weather event or hikarangi, then you've got to work out a way that's going to be able to manage that far more effectively than we do at the moment. So some big challenges still ahead in the how. Is so it's easy to do the strapline and legislation, operationalising it, which where the rubber hits the road, that's here. That makes it really a bit more challenging, I think.
Yeah, and I just agree with you, Dave, on the mayor's role. I think the mayor's, you can't escape it. You are the focal point. You are the people
Yes.
to come to, and you are elected by the community at large and their expectation. And it doesn't matter whether it's a balloon tragedy and you've got 11 dead people, or a flood, a storm. They look to you.
Yeah, exactly.
But you can't be in the kitchen doing the controls work. You shouldn't be.
Shouldn't be. But some of that's experience as well.
Yeah.
Excellent. Sorry. Oh, Gary. You're on mute, sorry. Yeah, because I can see that you've actually unmuted, but we still can't hear you. So I think we just have a tech problem. Sorry about that. Unless you want to chuck a question in the chat. No. Okay. Sorry about that. Any further questions?
Gary, if you got anything specific, just drop me a line.
Gary, if you want to drop Dave a line, he's all open for any questions. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. That was excellent. Fabulous. So that was just for information. So the final thing on the agenda is CDEM group appointments. I will hand over to you, Dan.
Thank you. So we've got a list of appointments, and I believe there's a scheduled. Everybody should be able to see that. And really, it's just, is there any questions or pieces to that?
Yes, apologies. So in your papers, there's a whole list of appointments to approve the removal of a number of people, but approve the addition of a number of people. So this is to join the CDEM group. So do we have any questions or comments on any of the people listed? Otherwise, we will approve their appointment and removal. Okay, I will move that motion. Jenna, do you mind seconding? Awesome. Everyone say aye. And that is approved. So I think that actually takes us to the end of this meeting before we head into a workshop. So I will close this with a karakia. Unuhia, unuhia, unuhia ki te uru tapinui, kia wātea, kia mama, te nākau, te tinana, te wairoa, i te ara takatū, koe rā e rongo, whakairia ake, ki runga, kia tina, tina huie, tai